Ever been paged at 3 a.m. with a vague alert and absolutely no idea what your system is actually doing? Welcome to Observability Explained, a new series where we'll learn how to stop guessing and start asking your production systems real questions. In this first episode, we're laying the foundation, the three pillars: logs, metrics, and traces, what they are and why each one matters. So picture the scene. It's 3 a.m. Users are complaining the app feels sluggish, and you're SSHed into a box just staring. Is it the database, the network, a bad deploy from yesterday afternoon? You're guessing in the dark, no clear signal of what's wrong, no view across your services, and the worst part, your users found out before your tools did. Now flip that around. What if your system was constantly telling you what it's doing, so you could ask it any question and actually get an answer? That, in a sentence, is observability. So here's the working definition we'll carry through the rest of this series. Observability is how well you can understand a system's internal state just from the data it emits, its logs, its metrics, and its traces. The key shift is that you're not logging into a box to poke around anymore. You're asking questions and letting the system answer. And those three pillars, logs, metrics, traces, that's where we're headed next. Now, before we get to those pillars, let's clear up a question I get all the time. Isn't this just monitoring with a fancier name? Not quite. Monitoring watches for the problems you already know about. CPU over 90%. Disk filling up. The classic stuff you set alerts on in advance. Observability is what kicks in when something weird happens that nobody predicted, like checkouts suddenly getting slow for users in Brazil at 2 p.m. Monitoring answers the questions you knew to ask. Observability lets you ask new ones on the fly. So think of monitoring as one piece of observability, the known alerts piece, not a competing idea. So, with that distinction out of the way, let's meet the three pillars that make observability work. Logs tell you what happened. Time-stamped records of discrete events, like a diary your system keeps. Metrics tell you how much or how many. Numbers measured over time, the vital signs. And traces tell you where the time went, following one request as it hops across services. Each answers a different question on its own, but together they let you see and actually explain almost anything your system does. Let's start with logs, the diary entries of your system. Each one is a time-stamped record of a single event, rich with context, what failed, which user, which order, and ideally, a trace ID to tie it to everything else. The upside is detail, the downside is volume. Logs get expensive fast at scale. So a quick tip before we move on: prefer structured logs like JSON so machines can actually query them instead of you grepping through walls of text at 3 a.m. Now to pillar 2, metrics. If logs tell you what happened, metrics tell you how much and how many, requests per second, error rates, latency percentiles, CPU usage, all rolled up as numbers over time. They're tiny, cheap to store, and perfect for dashboards and alerts. The trade-off? You can see the spike clearly, but a metric won't tell you why it happened. It's the symptom, not the diagnosis. Which brings us to pillar 3, traces. A trace follows a single request as it bounces through your system, hits the API gateway, calls Auth, queries the database, talks to the payment API. Each step is a span, and a shared tracehead stitches them all together. Suddenly, you can see exactly which hop ate up the time. The catch is you have to instrument your services to emit those spans. But once you do, debugging slow distributed systems stops being guesswork. So, how do these three pillars actually play together during a real incident? It usually goes in this order. Metrics fire the alert. Error rate just spiked at 2 p.m. Something is wrong. You jump to traces to find which service and which request is misbehaving. That tells you where. Then you pull the logs for that exact request to read the stack trace and see why. Metrics find it, traces locate it, logs explain it. That's the whole debugging loop. Let's put them side by side so the differences really click. Logs answer what happened with verbose text events, great for deep detail, but expensive to store. Metrics answer how much or how many as compact numbers over time. Cheap, perfect for trends and alerts. Traces answer where time went across a request's journey, medium cost, and the only one that shows you distributed latency. Same incident, three very different lenses. Now here's the catch. None of these signals appear by magic. Your code and the libraries around it have to actually emit them, and that work is called instrumentation. The good news is you don't have to invent it from scratch. Auto instrumentation gets you most of the way with very little effort. You add manual spans and logs for the steps that really matter to your business. And OpenTelemetry, a NeoTel, is the vendor-neutral standard that ties it all together. So why go through all that effort? Four big payoffs. You find issues fast, cutting time to resolution from hours down to minutes. You can debug things you can't reproduce locally because you're seeing real production behavior instead of guessing. You catch problems before your users do, since alerts fire on actual symptoms rather than angry tweets. And you genuinely understand your costs, spotting what's slow, wasteful, or quietly overscaled. Before we go deeper, let's clear up a few myths that trip people up. First, monitoring and observability aren't the same thing. Monitoring watches for problems you already know about, while observability helps you explore the ones you didn't see coming. Second, just hoarding every log isn't a strategy. It's expensive, slow to search, and metrics and traces are simply better tools for certain jobs. And finally, more data doesn't automatically mean more insight. Without structure, correlation IDs, and the right tooling, you're just drowning in noise. So, how do you actually do this well? A few habits pay off enormously. Log in structured JSON so machines can parse what you write, propagate a trace ID through every service so you can stitch the story together, and alert on what users actually feel, not on every twitchy metric. Adopting OpenTelemetry early saves you a painful migration later. On the flip side, avoid logging everything blindly, drowning your team in crywolf alerts, leaking secrets or personal data into logs, and stitching together three disconnected tools that never talk to each other. With those habits in mind, let's put names to the tools you'll actually encounter on the job. For metrics, Prometheus is the de facto standard, usually paired with Grafana for dashboards. Distributed tracing tends to run on Jaeger or Tempo, while logs flow into Loki or the classic EL-Koi stack. OpenTelemetry sits across all three as the instrumentation layer, and if you'd rather pay someone to wire it all together, Datadog and its commercial cousins are waiting with open arms. Before we move on, let's lock in the mental model. Observability is really just the practice of understanding your system through the data it produces. Logs tell you what happened, metrics tell you how much or how many over time, and traces show you where the time actually went as a request hops between services. The shorthand I want you to walk away with is this: metrics find the problem, traces locate it, and logs explain it. So, here's a quick decision aid for when you're staring at a problem and not sure where to look. If the question in your head is, what exactly went wrong in this one request? That's a logs question. If it's, is the system as a whole healthy? Are things trending the wrong way? Reach for metrics. If you're asking which service made this slow, that's traces. And if you genuinely don't know yet, which honestly is most incidents at 3 a.m., you want all three wired up and ready. If today gave you a feel for the three pillars, the rest of this series is where we go deeper. Next up, we dig into Prometheus and metrics properly, then distributed tracing, dashboards and alerting, and eventually SLOs and error budgets, the stuff that turns observability into real operational confidence. Because at the end of the day, you can't secure or operate what you can't see. If you want the full path laid out, it's all over at dargslan.com/courses. Before we wrap, I want to flip the mic over to you. Think back to the last production mystery you actually cracked, the one where something was broken and you finally found the thread that led you to the answer. Was it a log line buried in the noise? A metric that spiked at just the right moment? Or a trace that showed you exactly where things fell apart? Drop your story in the comments. I read them, and the best ones often shape future episodes. And that's where we'll leave it for episode 1. If this gave you a clearer picture of what observability actually is and why it matters when things go sideways, hit subscribe, because next time we're diving deep into the first pillar, logs. You can find more resources over at dargslan.com. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.